I was rewiring my rack and I was thinking this is a good time to discuss cabling choices. When it comes to 10 gig networking, there's always a debate between RJ45 or SFP+. Should you go with DAC, AOC, or just stick with good old Cat6a? The reality is they all move data at the same speed, but not all of them do it efficiently. 10G base T over RJ45 burns more power, while direct attached copper, DAC, is much more power efficient. So if you're looking to cut down on heat and energy costs, your choice matters. In this video, we're going to break down the real world differences between these options so you can pick the best one for your network. Now, no matter which network cabling you choose, you can't go wrong with the sponsor of today's video, and that's Micro Center. February is Build Your Own Month at Micro Center. Whether you're building your first computer or upgrading your current setup, February is the best time to build, upgrade, and save. NVIDIA's newest line of GPUs are just around the corner, and Micro Center has you covered. They have the best selection and variety of new NVIDIA GeForce RTX 5080 and 5090 models. Speaking of the new 500 series, looking to pick one up and don't know what to do with your old GPU? Not a problem. Micro Center has you covered with their GPU trade-in program. They offer an exclusive program for working GPUs purchased at Micro Center, ensuring you get the same-day value for your graphics card. Don't let your old tech become waste. Micro Center will even assist you in recycling your old, out-of-date tech or donating a computer to charity. If you're in the Santa Clara area, be on the lookout for the opening of a new Micro Center location. Sign up for early access and receive a free 128 gig flash drive when the store opens. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the RJ45 versus the SFP+, both being 10 gig right here. This card, as you may know right away, has active cooling. I don't know where to find the active cooling cards anymore. Most of the ones I've looked up now don't seem to have this. You can get a lot of used server cards. Even this card was only in the $50, $60 range. They're not that expensive. I bought this one a couple of years ago. If you get them though, if you get a used server one, make sure you have enough airflow going through the case to actively cool these, because if you use both these RJ45s, it's going to produce a decent amount of heat. Compared to the little bit simpler here, SFP plus DAC, we just have passive cooling, and even if you put in a fiber optic in these, it really doesn't generate a lot of heat. Now, both of these are Intel based, and that is a very popular question of, I want 10 gig hooked up, should I go with Intel? Absolutely. While you can find good compatibility with the other cards, Intel is the, I know it works, compatible with whether you doing an older TrueNAS BSD system or a newer TrueNAS Linux system. I don't have any qualms about their support for Intel chipsets. Now let's talk about fiber AOC, or active optical cable, versus standard fiber, where you buy the fiber and buy the transceiver. Now, AOC is fiber, but it's fiber with the module built on, and it can't be removed. The advantage to this, of course, is there's going to be no chance for dust to ever come in and cause a problem with it. Versus our traditional fiber, you're going to get these with the dust covers on. Do leave them on until you're ready to install. And these also have a dust cover in them, the transceiver, which looks like this. Same thing, keep that dust cover on there, because if any dust gets on there, it will not properly work. As far as using fiber inside the rack, yes, you absolutely can, but there's not really a good reason to use fiber. Not that fiber is that much more wattage, but it does take a little bit more power to run, but it's really just unnecessary. It has no advantage over DAC other than electrical isolation, which usually, because your rack should be properly grounded and there shouldn't be any issues or any surges that come through one server that wouldn't have first hopefully been filtered through the UPS or power conditioners that you have. So any of the advantages you have of fiber where you want to run long distances or in high EMF environments where there might be a problem, you don't really see that inside of a rack or in a single rack cage. Maybe if you had two racks next to each other running fiber, can have some advantages where, well, you may be worried about that UPS having some type of problem and a surge coming across. It's a rare condition, but if you're that concerned, then running fiber between racks might make sense. And of course, if you have any long distances to run, such as across a building or in a high EMF noise environment where you just have a lot of electromagnetic interference, then fiber is definitely a way to go to prevent that. But inside the rack, it's just not the most practical use. Now let's talk about DAC in the rack. And we don't want to use DAC just because it rhymes, but because it makes sense to use. The 7 meters is your passive DAC cable max length, and it has a usage of about 0.15 watts. So this is energy efficient, also means there's going to be less heat, and the cards, as I mentioned earlier, are relatively inexpensive that support DAC, as well as the switches, because there's a lot less electronics needed. When you take apart a DAC cable, you realize that they run on twin-X copper cable, which means just a pair of shielded copper. This has the disadvantage of that shorter shorter distance, but of course the advantage of needing less complicated electronics to move the signal across. So it will move more data for less power as compared to RJ45. RJ45 will of course go greater distances and has plenty of cables that do signal differential, which of course is what makes them so much more complicated as you go up in speed. Now, active DAC will get you up to 7 to 15 meters, but that's probably bigger than you need for most of your rack setups, but that's an option as well and still uses relatively small amounts of power. Now, the DAC I took apart was just a passive DAC, which is why there's so few electronics in there. But I went ahead and took apart a fiber module as well for those that are curious what they look like on the inside. You can see the tiny little transceivers. And also of note, there's a thermal pad in there to help dissipate the heat into the SFP cage itself. Now, both DAC and fiber support SFP or small form factor pluggable. SFP is 1 gig, SFP Plus is 10 gig, and SFP 28 is a 25 gig connection. These are all the same form factor, so each one of these will fit into these slots, and frequently even an SFP 28 slot is backwards compatible with SFP Plus and standard SFP. Although I have seen some that don't support the 1 gig standard, they only will support SFP Plus and SFP 28. But the QSFP Plus and the QSFP 28s, those are quad ports. They are only slightly bigger, so they're not 4 wide, but they are using 4 lanes. So in the case of using 4 connections with your QSFP Plus, you're going to get 4 10s or 40 gig, and QSFP 28, the 4 lanes are 25 gig, therefore you're going to get 100 gig. Now, there's plenty of other details if you want to dive deeper in this fs.com article. I'll leave that link down below, but I want to bring up that SFP Plus, the 10 gig standard, has been around since 2006, and SFP 28 since 2014, as well as the QSFP and QSFP 28 standards have also been around for quite a while. Therefore, there's a lot of equipment that you can buy on the secondhand market, use to build out your home lab, really budget friendly, and there's plenty of these cards floating around available. As I mentioned earlier, go with the Intels, even with any of the SFP cards. Now let's come back to the network card and talk about support here. I have a fiber module plugged in. I actually don't know if this particular model supports the fiber module, but this can be a challenge. Even though SFP, the small form factor pluggable, will physically fit in here and seems the same, they don't always work with fiber. They will work with DAC. That's what they are designed to work with, and they sometimes work with fiber depending on the model. You have to look up each card in the chipset and see if it has that support. So just because it plugs in, and even though it will light up sometimes, it may not have the right amount of wattage to actually make it work and function, and this can lead to, well, a lot of wasted hours troubleshooting because you decided to run fiber between all of your servers because it looks cool, when DAC is still the better choice because that also leans into the compatibility. Now for switches, this has been much less of an issue. Even this really cheap $49 switch that I reviewed before, kind of a weird off-brand 2.5 gig and 10 gig switch, I didn't have any problem with fiber or DAC. And of course, when you go to more popular brands, such as this MikroTik, which I still think is a good deal here in 2025, this little CRS305 1G is still holding up strong, and I was just using it the other day. It's kind of a nice little 10 gig 4-port switch with one single RJ45 that you can do PoE. Once again, this works with any of the DAC or fiber that I put into it. But let's talk about this situation. You can insert one of these RJ45 converters. Now, the problem with these RJ45 converters, especially the 10 gig modules, is they draw even more power. That power problem is also a heat issue. So if you start putting several of these in here, you may have to cool this or you may end up overheating the switch. And when I did the review of this really cheap switch, there is some type of bug in this. Of course, this is completely unmanaged, but when you put one of those in there, it gets so hot I can't touch the module, and I'm pretty sure it would burn out if I left it in there long enough. But the RJ45 converter modules, yeah, they don't work all that great. They're kind of, if you need them, they're okay. I've tested them before, but they're not the preferred solution, and putting in too many of these can put quite a draw on the switch. And I have never seen them work properly in any of these. Once again, power delivery problems. If it doesn't have enough power to run a fiber module, it is very unlikely that this will work in here. So there's not any cheap way to buy one of these and simply buy one of these modules and convert this into a 10 gig card. If you need an RJ45 10 gig, it's best to buy the dedicated equipment for it. Now, while DAC into rack might be a really good choice in terms of cabling, cable management, well, is still kind of a pain because dealing with this and putting on a little extra on these Velcro does help, but the DAC does kind of want to go on its own. So it's kind of easier to bundle them, try to pull them together and slowly work them into position because there's not much forgivingness in terms of any twists in them. So you got to really tame them well, and a lot of extra Velcro is your friend to keep it looking nice. It's especially a pain when you get to these QSFP 28s. This is kind of heavier. You don't want to exceed the bend radius, and so it's a little bit harder to tame in the rack. Something you can do though to loom the wires is this. Now this is just an empty keystone style patch panel, and I'm not saying to put any type of DAC keystones, but you can do this. Happens to be the right size. And if you have a lot of connectors on there, this can act as a wiring loom essentially to make it look a little bit nicer as they go across. That way, if you have quite a few connectors going to quite a few different servers, you can pretty it up a little bit. These are relatively inexpensive and kind of an easy way to do it, but it really depends on just how many you have, if it's worth going through that trouble. But a couple times I've had to do quite a few installs, and hey, this works for the fiber modules as well. Same thing, they slip right through there, and you can then see how you can organize it maybe a little bit better. Just an idea, but once again, even on the fiber, doing the Velcro when you're going between the switches. Now, this does work between the switches as well, your standard DAC or the fiber. I generally will use DAC when possible for the switches, for the same reasons I mentioned all throughout this video of lower wattage, lower usage, and well, less options for trouble unless you're going switches on long distance. But what works for you? Let me know in your thoughts and comments down below. Like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. Head over to my forums, forums.lawrencesystems.com, where you can have a more in-depth discussion about this and other topics, and head to lawrencesystems.com to connect with me on the socials at whatever socials I'm available on when you head over there. All right, and thanks.